is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. When I was 14, my dad and I drove 6 hours down a logging road in northern Ontario, the final hours on long since abandoned paths, till the road ran out, and we camped there for weeks on the banks of a small lake, catching fish for most of our meals and not seeing another person. I've camped and hiked a lot of different wildernesses, but I don't think I've ever felt quite so isolated from the rest of humanity as I did that far north in the Canadian forest. The nights were so dark, and the stars were so bright. I heard the haunting, spiritus calls of loons for the first time on that trip. These aquatic birds would pierce the dawn and dusk silence with their eerie song, and when we would spot them on the surface of the lake, they would disappear only to pop up many yards away. They struck me as more spirit than animal, and their otherworldly call both spooked and excited me. Chocolate tugs at our souls as much as our senses, pulling up memories, drawing out emotions, coloring in images in our mind, bringing poetry to our lips. It's one of the few indulgences we enjoyed as children and still explore as adults, and so it plays on nostalgia more readily than most, provoking both melancholy and joy. Today's guest chose the loon as the image for his chocolate company, and it strikes me as the most appropriate of mascots for chocolate, elusive but enticing, haunting but compelling, and surprising us every time. Long before founding Loon Chocolate in the town of Manchester in southern New Hampshire, Scott Watson was a craft brewer. Scott brewed at now-closed Nutfield Brewing in Derry, New Hampshire from 1995 to 2002, and his memories and experiences of brewing beer in an earlier era of craft beer definitely informed his approach to making bean-to-bar chocolate decades later. Craft beer got its start around 1980 and grew in popularity through the 80s and 90s, though it remained a small, niche segment of the beer world. In the late 90s, the market got a bit ahead of itself and ahead of consumer demand, and many breweries closed. Doomsdayers announced the end of the short-lived craft beer experiment, but the sky wasn't actually falling. The market was just correcting. Throughout the aughts, craft continued to grow, and the market exploded around 10 years ago to now represent around 15% of total beer sales in the United States. Bean-to-bar chocolate is still a relatively small segment of chocolate, much like craft beer was 20 years ago, and Scott is able to offer some interesting insights on how the young craft beer market compares to the still young craft chocolate market. I talked with Scott recently and asked him how he got started in bean-to-bar chocolate and how he got here from brewing. He shared that his chocolate journey began in an unusual way. He was watching a food documentary that included a coffee shop in Vietnam, and in the background of the shot, they were roasting cacao.
They had just kind of glazed over the process, but what really struck me is how come I don't know how chocolate is made? And it started to take me down a point of learning about everything I could about the origins of chocolate. And, you know, as a youngster going to Pennsylvania to, Hershey Park, I remember, seeing like a ride and whatnot of doing everything, but like diving into things and realizing that, they come from a pod that grows on a tree around the equator. It really just started to open up my eyes to not only how chocolate was made, but what is the definition of good chocolate. And that kind of pulled me in when I started to learn about the processes and things. It automatically brought me to my days of brewing, and like my eyes lit up when I heard that there was fermentation involved, and like cracking the cacao, like it reminded me of like, milling before I went into a mash tun. And then from that point, it was like, what do I need to make some craft chocolate in my house right now? And and then that pulled me into my home brewing days before I was a professional brewer. And I found myself getting a small melanger and a hair dryer, doing winnowing on my back deck and making a mess of everything. I started producing just a little bit for myself and friends and family, very similar to how any home brewer takes pride in a beer that they make. And then from that point, just learning about some of the great craft chocolate makers around the country and seeing how they were popping up. So about 3 years ago this May, we registered our company and we started to design our brand.
You've alluded a couple times to your background in brewing. Why don't you share with me a little bit about your work in craft beer?
In the early 90s, I worked at a friend's home brew store. It was called Jasper's Homebrew. They're still active today, just under new ownership. But working there, it was supporting my hobby of craft brewing and also learning a little bit about home brewing from some of the local customers and getting tips and giving tips and learning the product. And in 1995, in my area, there was a craft brewery that was just opening up. And the owner had come to the shop saying, look, I'm looking for someone, as an assistant brewer. Do you know anyone? And the owner of the homebrew store recommended me, and we hit it off really well.
What brewery was that?
It was called Nutfield Brewing Company, based in Derry, New Hampshire. So in August of 95, I started brewing there. It was a 25-barrel brew house. One of the nice, unique things that we did was open fermentation. I'm a big fan of open fermentation. It was based on the Peter Austin system, which is there's a brewer at Shipyard Brewing Company, Alan Pugsley, one of the founders of Shipyard. He brought this brew house design over from England, and some big beer makers in New England really took on that style of brewing. About 6 months into working there, I quickly was promoted to head brewer. And about 6 months after that, I was vice president, head brewer, operations manager. I worked there until 2002. So I brewed professionally for 7 years under Nutfield Brewing Company.
That was a tricky era in craft beer. The late 90s, you saw some difficulty in the market. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
It's funny you say that, because I was trying to describe it to someone the other day. Back in the late 90s, at least in the New Hampshire area, craft beer represented 2% of beer sales. And of that 2%, 1% of that was typically Sam Adams. I tried to describe it to people. We're fighting for 1%. And at the time, back in the 90s, there was just a small fraction of us, working for an area where things like shelf space, and why should we put this little brewery, on the shelf where we could just put another mass marketed industrial beer, and we can sell them and kind of go on to the next one 6 months after that fad goes out. Like, local beer meant nothing. But we knew that going in. It wasn't like a discovery. And one of the things also that we struggled with here in New Hampshire is 80% of all the beer was sold through supermarket chains. And there's 3 supermarket chains. So now you're trying to get, you're fighting for your best 1%, and you're really looking at 3 stores or 3 chains that are going to dictate how your performance is this year. There's definitely on-premise beer on tap, but to grow the brand, getting on the shelf at a supermarket was kind of like focus number one.
Mm-hmm. Do you see corollaries at all between the bean to bar world today and where craft beer was when you were brewing?
Oh, 100%. As I started my brewing career, many people that I met along the way used to use the term dark beer. Like, for example, I don't like that dark beer, or is that dark beer? It's kind of funny now as you and I talk about it, because what you and I call dark beer, even back then, I'm sure is totally different. They're looking at an amber pale ale and considering that dark, where what makes me feel good is today, I think majority of consumers would think dark beer is something looking like a stout. So there has been a growth of education through the years, just a consumer education growth that was required, people being introduced to more and more high quality made beers. With those consumers, giving them the time, they got that aha moment where they found that one beer that like spoke to them. When I look at craft chocolate now, a lot of events that we've done, pop-up events or tastings, I hear, is it that dark chocolate? I don't like any of that dark chocolate stuff or that bitter stuff. And I look at chocolate now, craft chocolate specifically, and there's some really high quality makers throughout the country and world that are providing all these different flavors to consumers, like all different types. Where we think the spectrum is today is probably 10% of where it's going to be in 20 years from now. But introducing to consumers, this is what high quality craft chocolate tastes like. And hopefully you convert and you bring along people with you that start to see it too. I see so much symbolism between 1998 and 2020 in the craft beer / chocolate.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half-pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers. The comparison Scott made there about popular perceptions of dark beer and dark chocolate definitely resonated with my own experience. As a beer educator leading beer events, I've run into misconceptions about dark beers more times than I can remember. The color of beer is almost entirely determined by the malts that have been used in its production. These malts can be used in different ratios to create beers that range from a very pale, straw-like color to nearly black, and hitting every shade of gold, amber, and brown in between. In addition to color, these malts will also impact flavor, aroma, and mouthfeel. The color of the beer, however, is not directly correlated to alcohol strength or flavor intensity. The color impact of dark malts can be quite potent, and it doesn't always take much to create a dark beer. Beers of any color can be light or heavy-bodied, low or high in alcohol, and mild or extreme in flavor intensity. Many people assume, though, that dark beers will be stronger, heavier, more intense, or more bitter than pale beers, even though none of those attributes correlate to color. This leads to a lot of newcomers feeling trepidation about tasting dark beers or, depending on their personality, feeling like they've arrived when they start drinking dark styles. This same attitude can occur with dark chocolate, though the comparison isn't quite the same as with beer, as higher cacao percentage in darker bars does often correlate to more flavor intensity and less sweetness. The same attitude persists, however, with some newcomers feeling trepidation about trying higher percentage dark chocolate, and some aspiring to only eat dark chocolate because they perceive it as more legitimate than milk chocolate, which they associate with supermarket candy bars. It's fascinating the way these perceptions and assumptions match up between beer and chocolate. I asked Scott if he thought we'll see bean-to-bar chocolate grow into more mainstream acceptance like we've seen with craft beer. You mentioned back then that craft beer was 1 or 2%. Now I think it's 14%, 15%, something like that. From a numbers standpoint, do you think we will see bean-to-bar chocolate grow into much wider acceptance like we have with craft beer?
Yeah, I mean, when I originally looked at founding Loon Chocolate, I've always been a believer that the American palate is willing to grow, but you need good quality products to be presented. And when I look at the California wine movement, good coffee, local cheese, people are willing to purchase once they're put in front of high quality, high crafted products. And I think chocolate is it's a perfect fit, right? If you look at what industrial chocolate is, whether you're talking about ingredients, whether you're talking about labor practices, or lack of transparency, there are so many reasons why consumers, once educated, will want to go to craft chocolate. As education grows, I think the category will expand.
As you were starting down your chocolate journey, you mentioned that you were remembering all these things that were similar from your brewing days. How did your experience as a home brewer and then a professional brewer inform your beginning to make chocolate?
Yeah, I think with me, one of the attractions to brewing and also into chocolate making is I really enjoy the process of multiple stages to get to that final development. I mean, to look at a ripened cacao pod sliced open and you see those beans fresh, unfermented, and to say that this right here is going to be transformed into a chocolate bar. To me, that's where my love of the industry is to be able to go through that. And the understanding of, going back into the beer world to look at high quality malted barley and some dry whole hop and to say, we're going to pour this out of a draft, in 10 to 14 days. And to go through all those steps, even when I'm scheduling, like when we're forecasting like what we need to do for the next 2 weeks for production, say, being able to look at, for example, a 14-day window and say, okay, we need to be roasting beans here. We need to crack them here. It's going to take 3 days for us to grind it. And then we want to age it a little before we temper it and form it into bars. That scheduling, how I used to forecast brewing beer, has been a benefit. For me to be able to forecast my beer schedule for 7 years and say, this is what we're going to do today. So we can bottle in 10 days from now. This is what we need to do today. We need to rack off this beer, or, we need to have it carbonated for 2 days from now, kind of thing. All of those processes, which I've always enjoyed, have made the transition into chocolate making very smooth for me. I mean, we certainly have our growing pains and hiccups along the way. And I'd like to say too that, back when I was brewing, we were working on a bottling machine that was 45 years old that was really designed to bottle soda, not beer. So, sometimes parts would break and you have to shrug it off and become an expert in that little tiny piece that you need to replace and get it done because the entire supply chain is on pause. And it doesn't mean that it's end of days. It just means we gotta work on this now. And this is immediately your focus. So if we have equipment problems with what we use today, it's under that same experience of, okay, we've been here before. We need to get this part right here so we can get that part going, so we can get the whole operation going. it's been helpful with that past experience.
Always thought it's interesting. Both of these industries, it feels like most people get their start doing it at home and doing it as a
Yeah.
hobby before moving into doing it professionally. And there's so much DIY, adapting the wrong equipment to do the job you need it to do and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I look at Ben at Potomac Chocolate down in the Northern Virginia area. I remember some of the first videos that I saw of his where he's roasting beans in a modified kitchen oven. And I'm like, oh, geez, kudos to him. Like, I don't think I could go that deep. Like if I see a part and I need to fix this part, or I need to think outside the box, how we can make this more efficient, that's one thing. But yeah, to your point, there have been a lot of DIY or Yankee ingenuity necessities to move forward with most of our equipment.
Do you find that when you're tasting chocolate, are your sensory descriptions informed at all by your background in beer? Do you find yourself using some of the same palate descriptors?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. With me, back when I was a head brewer and even now with chocolate, I try to really limit my descriptions when I talk to people. Back when I was a brewer, what I really didn't want to become is someone that becomes intimidating to talk about beer when I'm educating someone. So, I wouldn't say that, oh, it tastes like barnyard hay and wet saddle and things like that. And like I just tried to say, it might have some notes of berry in it or hints of chestnut, being really non-intimidating if I could. And found myself now today doing it with chocolate, where when I look at this small craft chocolate group, I want it to grow, and coming across as easy and easily descriptive as I can so more people can invite. I kind of think about how they look at things. Like I don't like to over describe it to people, but at the same time, I always embrace when I hear someone else's feedback. A lot of times I prefer to hear someone else's feedback on it and to get an understanding of where they're coming from and what kind of palate they have. I like to tell them how I think they should taste the chocolate, take a couple bites, let it melt at your body temperature, move it around a little. And then, that feedback to me is always enjoyable because it's so subjective. It's one thing to say, oh, geez, it has a hard carbonation level, on a beer, but it can be very subjective to me whether it tastes like roasted nuts or raw nuts. And to me, there's no wrong answer. And I've never been someone that wants to like force a flavor profile onto you. And then you go, oh, I don't taste raw nut. I taste coconut. And that's the important thing, is that people can express what they're tasting. But I really find myself trying not to influence people. We just changed our packaging of all our products in March. And one of the things that we did do is we put some tasting notes on there so you can get an understanding. But I've never been one to say, oh, you should taste date or fig or whatever.
What led to the change in branding?
Couple things. When we first started, it's the first business that I've ever had of my own. I had background in the brewery of, all the steps it takes to launch a brand and understanding that. And at the time, my resources were incredibly limited. Like most DIY start making chocolate or beer, you have limited. So I was using a pool of resources around me. And one of my friends, his daughter was a great illustrator. And we started, on a piece of paper in a coffee house, what the brand would look like. And just since that time, we've gotten a little larger. When we start to talk about, okay, nutritional value is very important to have on our packaging as we move forward. And to educate people a little more on who we are, so more dialogue, to put a UPC code that's widely accepted. Those kind of things led me to a local designer that my friend that makes wooden sunglasses, he had used for some work, and I was just blown away by it. And then when I found out that she was 10 miles down the road from me, it kind of was like, okay, things are lining up here. So we started a little less than a year ago working on crafting what the brand image should look like, and what are important things to me. And she kind of like filtered everything into where we are today. And I'm pretty proud of where we were in the past, but where we're going in the future, I'm equally as proud.
What went into the name Loon?
Yeah, so we're a New Hampshire chocolate maker. I was born and raised in New Hampshire. And when I thought of names for a chocolate company, I really wanted something that resonated with people in my area. Loons are kind of a badass bird, and they've made a comeback. They're not to where they used to be, but they're seen more and more in the area. I thought that was the right symbol for us.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, my book on pairing craft beer and craft chocolate is available now on Amazon and on the Bean to Barstool shop. Pairing Beer and Chocolate, a guide to bringing the flavors of craft beer and craft chocolate together, is out now. This paperback book explains the process of pairing beer and chocolate, includes a guide to hosting a pairing at home, walks through dozens of beer styles to provide style-by-style pairing guidance, and gives room for taking your own pairing notes along the way. This is the only book on pairing beer and chocolate available. Grab your copy now at the link in the show notes or on Amazon. If you manage a tap room, bookstore, chocolate shop, or cafe and want to stock the book, get in touch about our easy wholesale process. Beer and chocolate belong together, and this book is your guide to getting the most out of every pairing. Let's talk about your chocolate itself then. How are you sourcing your beans?
Most of our beans we get through Uncommon Cacao, based in Berkeley. When we first started, we were also purchasing a bean from Bolivia from them. And unfortunately, the production ran out with Uncommon, where they were no longer carrying that bean. And I started to do a little homework and found that one of the importers, it's two brothers, and one of them lived in Bolivia and the other one lived in Salisbury, Massachusetts, 45 minutes away from me. Uncommon Cacao does great things for this industry, period, hands down. But being able to work with Nelson and say, hey, I want to get these beans, and then talk to me about some of the farmers. So I continued that relationship, but I've tried some others pre-COVID. I think I was a little more open to just try getting 50 pounds from this company or that company and bring them in. I think one of the things with COVID and with the new packaging is this time we're probably a little conservative with what directions we want to go. We have a rebranded product, and we want to focus on getting that out. So I'm open to growing into other flavors and origins, but at the same time, I'm very happy with the 5 that we get right now.
What are some of your most popular bars?
The Bolivian, which is 70%, and our 72% Haiti are probably our number 1 and 2 on the single origin. Depending on what kind of event we're at or online sales, our inclusion bars sometimes we sell more of than our single origin. I think every chocolate maker wants to be like Dandelion and have 12 single origin bars, and this is what we have. But our inclusion bars, we make one that's a 70% blended cacao where we use Maine Sea Salt on pop-up events. That seems to be very popular. And then we also have one called The Ghost in the Sea, which is a 70% blend, but we use Maine Sea Salt and ghost pepper on that. It's really nice because it'll give like 3 solid flavors. So when you first taste it, you get that chocolate, and then immediately you'll pick up that Maine Sea Salt and then get the ghost pepper at the end. So it's like 3 different flavor experiences, like in a single bite.
Given your background in beer and interest in beer, have you had the chance to work with any beer ingredients or collaborate with any breweries?
I've worked with some beer ingredients more in the homebrew side of things, where I've just been doing things with my old home melanger, playing around with dried malt extract and also like steeping hop juice and dehydrating it and seeing what it's like. That wasn't the greatest idea, or at least the batch that I made. That was an epic fail. But I have played with some stuff. I have some collaboration opportunities that both in the beer and coffee segment, that one of which we're working on pretty heavily. I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by some great New Hampshire breweries. I think it's just a matter of timing when it works right for us as well as works right for them. Going back to, my beer days, when we founded the New Hampshire Beer Guild back in like 96, I think brew pubs and breweries totaled like 12. So we're sitting at, some bar with 15 of us feeling like real trailblazers. And now, like, between breweries and brew pubs, I can't keep up with the number in New Hampshire. I want to say it's like north of 60. And then when you look at micro distilleries on top of it, it might even break 100. And wineries, it's just a totally different environment. So there's lots of great, opportunities out there. With us, with the new rebranding, and we moved into a new location back in August. We've kind of just been hunkering down and focusing on getting our product out.
What are some of your favorite beers to drink?
Well, I can tell you about favorite beers, and it's probably just age-wise, is like back in the mid-90s, if I could get a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale just sitting in front of me back then, it was like, this is magic.
That's
like,
still one of my favorite beers.
Yeah. It's one of those, almost like a comfort food to me when it comes to beer. When I want to grab something that brings back, lots of good memories, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale or Anchor Steam. And it's probably because the two of those at the time were like these, and still are, these very large breweries that were way on the other side of the United States. Mm-hmm. So it was a bit of a rarity. There was a Mexican restaurant here in New Hampshire that actually was one of the only places you could get Anchor Steam on draft. And every time I would go there, it would be like, absolutely. But I definitely changed my styles with the season. This time of year, I'm drinking, I guess they call it New England IPA now, but I'm drinking like IPAs. In the summer, I may do wheat beers. If I do, it's usually a European wheat. I like that banana kind of yeast flavor in those. I'm a big harvest ale kind of Oktoberfest person, like as that temperature starts to cool down, to get a little more malt on my tongue. I think if I don't know what I want, I'll definitely gravitate to an IPA.
Do you have any opportunity to pair beer with your chocolate?
Yeah, in the summertime, I was doing it kind of for fun, and I was just leading up to this podcast, I was thinking about maybe doing it again, where I would just go to the store on a Friday and just pick something completely random, that take one sip, and it just like any time I have 3 or 4 bars kicking around my kitchen counter, mostly factory seconds. But and I on a Friday night, I just do a beer pairing. Like, this is why I chose this beer. This is some of the aromas I get from it. These are some of the tasting notes, and this is beer. I'm not looking to necessarily have someone go out and go buy a 4-pack of that beer, but it's more just to let people know that, like, wine isn't the only liquid that pairs with chocolate. Red wine specifically. We just worked on a pairing sheet. My sales reps had asked if I could pair some wine with our bars. So I wrote down all the bars and I filled in what I considered the easy red wines for some of our bars. But we have a beer called a Rainbow Crunch, and it's a 50% dark milk chocolate, and we put Fruity Pebbles on it. So it gives like a nice crunch. It's fun. It's a lot of the kids at pop-up events like it, sometimes more adults than kids. But we wanted something that we loosened our collar a little. And on this beer pairing, I'm like, you put that with a milk stout, and it pairs really nice. The milk in both products, you get that lactose there, and you get that breakfast cereal in there. It's, at least in my mind, it doesn't have to be very formal to have a pairing. You can have fun pairings too.
Do you ever miss brewing?
Mentally, yes. Physically, no. I got out of the game because physically and mentally it was getting to me. But there is something, like, if I see a snowy early morning, there was nothing more romantic about brewing than sitting in the brew house at 5 a.m. on a snowy morning and mashing in, or just adding the first addition of hops. It's weird. I can totally see every little part of the brew house, the smell. You use all your senses in brewing and in chocolate making. I miss those experiences a lot. When you walk out of the brew house, you have to remember that you're fighting for that 1%. So there's some parts of it that were business, but missing the romance of brewing. Going back to working in a brew house with open fermentation, being able to get up on the ladder in the morning and overlook 5 different batches of beer, and just how the yeast was fermenting, you knew, okay, that beer right there, based on it 48 hours, that might be a little too cold, and I need to check the temperature on that right now. Or that one's done fermenting, I need to check the OG on that, and maybe we're done over there. I certainly miss all of that. But getting a clump of 180-degree spent grain in my boot and trying to whip that boot off as fast as I can because it's burning my foot, I don't miss those days.
What are the equivalent moments in chocolate making, the sensory moments that just make it worth it?
Yeah, I think, with us, we use Cocoa Town melangers that handle 100 pounds of product. Just that original, so we do a pre-grind before we go into the melanger, and getting that initial 70 pounds of nibs going, and that really astringent smell, hearing that motor work a little harder because it's like, what's going on here? We need to smooth things down, but like that real raw aroma is something that it makes me smile every time. And watching that spin, it can be as mesmerizing as your favorite campfire, at least to me, where I can just sit there and slowly over the course of 30 minutes, just watch those nibs turn into something that many people still can't fathom. They have no idea what it's doing, but seeing that temperature heat up and some of that butter being released and liquefying and breaking down, and just that real hard astringent smell, to me, it's just a joy to do.
What story is Loon Chocolate telling?
I really liked that when I saw that. One of the things with us being a New Hampshire company is it's important for me to tie in New Hampshire into our product. Proud motto here in New Hampshire, it's on every license plate, is live free or die. With me, when we started to launch our brand, we created a tagline of live free and eat great chocolate. It does two things. One, it ties into New Hampshire, to people that are here in New Hampshire. But on a larger level for me, we're a tiny chocolate maker. We have big ambitions and big things that we want to do. We would like to make an impact on ethically sourced chocolate. Right now we're a small maker that is making small amounts. We continue to grow, but we would like that live free and eat great chocolate be from the original sourcing all the way to the final consumer, having that experience go through everyone.
Loon's single origin chocolate bars are thoughtful and measured, with beautifully clean and clear flavor profiles. The Semuliki Forest Uganda 72% bar brought to mind a bright morning beside a slow-moving river, deep and languorous. A simple Maine current of brownie and nuts threw off eddies of dried fruit and just a touch of astringent bitterness on the finish. The Haiti bar of the same percentage read much sweeter to me, with notes of flowers, dates, and cool berries, while the Heirloom Bolivia 70% bar offered golden raisin, tarmac, and sweet shaded blackberries. Loon's Maine Sea Salt bar has a lovely quayside brininess to complement the familiar chocolate, and the Caribbean Kiss bar with shaved coconut and ginger thankfully does not shy away from the coconut, while the ginger gives a touch of lime and slowly grows in the shade of the coconut flavors. I loved hearing Scott's memories from his brewing days, memories of aromatic steam rising from the boil kettle when he added hops, or the hedonistic comfort of starting the warm mash as snow fell outside, and hearing how chocolate now provides those same evocative sensory satisfactions, even though the details are completely different. When you taste good chocolate or good beer, remember not only the labor that went into producing it at the hand of the maker, but also the joy. The chocolate maker or the brewer was having their own rich sensory experiences while making that bar in your hand or that beer in your glass, and your experiences meet when you taste their creation, like both of you tapping on opposite sides of a wall, hearing the other in the next room. You can learn more about Scott Watson and Loon Chocolate in the show notes. I encourage you to check out Loon's website and consider ordering some of their excellent chocolate bars. Please share Bean to Barstool with your friends and leave a review for the show on your favorite listening platform. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.